Hello, my name's Simon. I'm a six-figure Amazon seller in the UK, and today we're going to be going over the differences between doing a sole trader or a limited company as an Amazon FBA seller. So let's jump straight into it. So before you start your Amazon journey, it's a very important thing to consider whether you want to start off as a sole trader or whether you want to start off as a limited company. And we're going to be going over the pros and cons of those. So let's have a look at the slides I've made and get straight into it here. So here we have the sole trader pros and cons, and we'll go over these now. So the first pro of starting off as a sole trader is that, or in general, everything is much simpler, but it's a simpler accounting. That's the first thing. It'll be simpler and cheaper. So filing accounts for a limited company is a bit more complicated and more expensive. Doing it as a sole trader, essentially what you'll be doing is submitting a self-assessment. And you can either do that yourself, or more likely you should probably get an accountant to do it. But this is something you can probably do yourself if you can figure it out. So simpler accounting. The second pro is that you keep all the profits. You don't have a limited company taking its share of the profits. Everything you earn is essentially as if you're working a second job. That's essentially how that works. That's a good way to think of this, actually. If you're doing Amazon FBA as a sole trader, essentially it's considered a second job. So it comes in through self-assessment, and all the profits are basically yours to keep, obviously after taxes. It's easier to set up. That's probably the main reason. So to start off as a sole trader is that it's easier to set up. It's simpler to get your feet wet on the business. You don't have to go through any complicated setups of limited companies. You can essentially just get started right away. And if you decide to kind of bail out, then it's a much simpler process to kind of wrap up if you decide that this business is not for you versus a limited company. And probably the biggest reason that people start off as a sole trader is that you can have your own VAT threshold. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. But essentially when you start off as a sole trader, you have a £90,000 revenue VAT threshold that you can utilize. So that means you can sell £90,000 worth in a 12-month rolling period without having to register for VAT. Now let's look at some of the cons though. And the first one is probably the biggest one, is that you're liable for the business. And when I say you're liable, I mean if something goes wrong with the business, if the business incurs a debt, if the business gets sued or has any legal action, anything like that, you are on the hook for it because the business is you, essentially. So if you own a home or any assets, in theory, they could be in jeopardy if something goes really wrong. Now, the odds of this are very slim, of course, but this is the biggest one to keep in mind, basically, that, you are liable for anything that goes wrong in the business. So you can probably get insurance to kind of cover this kind of thing, but it's still, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. Now, depending on what kind of job you've got, this can be either more or less tax efficient. Generally, though, if you're in the higher tax bracket in a job already, then it's going to be way less tax efficient to pay yourself as a sole trader, because you'll be paying 40% or whatever the high rate of tax is. So if you're in that higher rate of tax, then maybe sole trader's not for you, but maybe still the pros outweigh the cons here in terms of paying a little bit more tax. So, but it's something to keep in mind anyway. And the next con, I suppose, the last one, is that from a long-term point of view, there's way more admin involved going from a sole trader and doing that and then moving to a limited company, because you have to transfer everything over. So it might seem like a simpler approach to begin with, and it is. In the long run, however, you end up having to do everything twice, because you do it once as a sole trader and then you eventually convert over to a limited company, and you have to do it essentially all again, and then you have to transfer everything from the sole trader into limited company, and it becomes a real pain, and you've got to wrap up the sole trader and things like that. So it is, from a long-term point of view, and this is what the process I went through, guys. I started off as a sole trader and I did limited company, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of wish I just started off as a sole trade, as a limited company, because it was a lot of headache for me to transfer from the sole trader to limited company. But each person needs to make their own decision. This is definitely not financial advice or any kind of advice. This is all just my opinion. So let's look at the pros and cons of a limited company. Now, the first one is, gets rid of that major con of a sole trader, is that it is a limited company, so it's limited liability. And that means that essentially, when you create a limited company, essentially you're creating a baby in a way, a new entity. And essentially that's how you should think of it. A limited company is a totally separate entity from yourself. You are essentially just the caretaker of that business, of that limited company. So again, if anything happens to go wrong with the company, then the buck stops with the company. Nothing can be gone after for you, basically, as the director, in terms of any liabilities, essentially. You're just the caretaker. So that's probably the biggest benefit of running a limited company. And that obviously takes away that biggest con of being a sole trader. Now, it's more tax efficient as well, the next pro. Another good reason to do a limited company is that you can kind of mix around and play with how you're going to deal with how you're going to deal with paying taxes. So you can pay yourself as a director, up to the tax threshold of like £12,000, whatever it is at the moment, which is tax-free. And then you can pay yourself through dividends, which are much more tax efficient than paying yourself as a PAYE salary. So in the long run, you'll end up paying less taxes, and these taxes obviously can add up as well. So that's probably one of the two major big things about running a limited company versus a sole trader. The next one, again, is could be very efficient with taxes. You can have multiple shareholders. You could be you and your wife as directors, and both of you could, pay yourself the most tax efficient way, essentially. So another good way to potentially, it's not avoiding tax, it's just doing it in the correct way and using the tools that are available when you're a director of a limited company. So you can end up paying yourself, let's say none of you work, you get roughly around £12,000 tax free a year. You can both take that money directly out of the company as a salary, and then the rest of it you can pay as dividends to both of you. And it might end up keeping your VAT threshold down if, as a household, you decide to pay yourself a certain amount of money. Let's say it's £50,000. Rather than one person taking £50,000, two people can take £25,000. And if you do it that way, you'll pay way less tax, splitting it into two of 25 rather than one salary of 50. Now let's go on to the cons, and there are some cons to consider. Accounting is much more expensive for a limited company. You basically can't do it yourself. Like when you're a sole trader, you can do the self-assessment yourself, no problem. When you're a limited company, unless you've got an accounting background, you really shouldn't do this yourself. So you're going to have to get an accountant. I recommend you get an accountant either way anyway, but accounting for limited companies is much more expensive. Just something to consider. I pay roughly around £1,700 a year for accounting. That includes VAT as well. And also bookkeeping. But yeah, more expensive accounting, something to consider. But yeah. There's obviously more admin involved as well, especially when you go VAT registered. But yeah, overall, running a limited company is a much more serious business than running a sole trader. So running as a sole trader. So there's more admin involved, more paperwork, more things you have to do to keep HMRC and everyone very happy, company's house happy. It's nothing too burdensome really, but I'm just saying it is a bit more admin work. It's still worth doing in my opinion, but just something to consider anyway. And the final thing is that your information, or the company's information more likely, is available on Companies House. Now, not everything's available, but they can see who the directors are, they can see what the company's address is, which is why you might want to use a virtual address for a limited company. You can see the end of year accounting stuff as well, or a lot of that stuff's available on Companies House. Now, that may be a pro or a con for you. Well, I don't know if it'll be a pro, but it might be a con for you if you don't want that information available. I mean, there's kind of no way around it really. That's just the way it works. All that information is available for every single company. Obviously, it's not like super detailed, but it does show like profit and loss and things like that, basic accounting stuff. So that may be a con for you if you're a private person. I don't know. Now, before we get on to the final topic, which is should you start as a sole trader and convert to a limited company, I'm going to talk about my sponsor, Profit Protector Pro. Now, guys, you might be just starting to get into Amazon now, and you might not be thinking about all the software you might need, but at some point, if you do Amazon FBA, you're going to need a repricer. And Profit Protector Pro is the best repricer in the UK and the world as far as I'm concerned. Now, the reason you need a repricer is because you're going to need to stay on top of all the prices of all your items. Prices constantly fluctuate for all your items as you're selling them on Amazon. And if you want to maximize your sales, you need a repricer that's going to be able to adjust those prices up and down depending on what's going on with the market. Now, you can try and do this yourself, but then you'll soon realize you'll be sat there all day, trying to match prices or put your prices up. And in the long run, it's just going to be way more headache to do it yourself. And it's just better to get some software to do it for you. I'm a big believer that if you can get a bit of software for a relatively cheap price to do something for you so you can focus on more important business matters, you should 100% do it. So yeah, definitely take advantage, guys. Keep this in mind for your Amazon business. I'll be talking more about it as well in the future. But yeah, if you want to sign up, there's a link in the description, guys. So the last thing we're going to talk about is, should you start as a sole trader and then convert over? Again, not advice. This is just kind of what I did and what many people do. You have to make your own decision on what you want to do. But here are the pros and cons of doing that. So what is fairly typical is people start off as a sole trader, mainly because of all the pros and cons we've talked about, simpler and things like that. And then once they're happy and they've hit the VAT threshold, they then convert over to a limited company. So, let's talk about that VAT threshold then. So one of the biggest pros of doing this is right now anyway, again, this is not advice, but I believe HMRC still allow you to set up as a sole trader. And then once you hit that VAT threshold of 90,000, you can then essentially wind down that sole trader business and then essentially transfer everything over to a limited company, which again now is a brand new entity. And then that VAT threshold resets to 0. And then you essentially get 2 bites of the cherry, of £90,000 of VAT threshold. So that can be quite a nice thing, I guess. It's going to save you a little bit of money on paying VAT here and there. There are pros and cons to this, and we'll go into the cons in a second. But yeah, that's the main reason people do the sole trader to limited company conversion, is that VAT threshold while it's still available. The next pro is, it's less commitment at first. As we've talked about before, you might not like this Amazon business. It's not for everyone. So if you start off as a sole trader and you decide, this is not for me, I'm not interested anymore, you basically just stop there and then. That's basically the end of it. And then just file whatever profits you've made with your self-assessment for that year, and then you're basically done. Whereas if you try and do that with a limited company, you have to wind it down, write to company's house, dissolve the company, make sure your accounts are all filed correctly. It's a little bit more work to do a limited company to wind one down. So it's not, again, end of the world, but it's just a little bit more work. So what are the cons of doing this sole trader to limited company? Well, the biggest one is the admin, and I talked about this previously. In the long run, it's way more work. So if you have to, and I talk about this as well, my second point, having to wrap up a sole trader, is that essentially you are essentially creating 2 businesses, and the first one you run as a sole trader, but then you have to wind that down and then convert everything over from the, excuse my hand gestures here, from the sole trader into limited company. So you have to do stock transfers, money transfers. You have to then wrap up and do accounting and all your self-assessment stuff. You have to then let Amazon know that you're going to convert over from a sole trader to limited company. If you've got any business bank accounts, you have to then create new accounts on your company. You have to transfer software and things over as well. So there's a lot of work that goes from transferring a sole trader to limited company. Now, it's still maybe worth it, potentially, to save that VAT. I don't know. But for me, I actually regret doing the sole trader to limited company because essentially it was so much work, and I ran into problems with Amazon trying to convert over. Normally it's a fairly easy process that takes a couple of weeks. For me, it took nearly 3 months. I think it's 2.5 months to convert over. It depends how Amazon are being. They're busy and things like that. So those are the biggest cons, I guess. And then the final one as well is it's going to be a slower learning process. Not having VAT to pay is a crutch. And if you continue to walk on crutches, then you're not going to build a strong business. So essentially, if you do the sole trader to limited company and try and take 2 bites of the VAT threshold, you're going to be non-VAT registered for a long time. And while you might make a little bit more money in the short term, I think in the long term, having to learn to be a VAT registered seller is probably a better thing, and you're going to make more money. So in the long run, it all depends what your goals are for the business. If you just want to run this as a side hustle, you want to keep your full-time job and just make a bit of extra money, 500,000, 2,000 a month, sure, it makes sense to maybe just try and stay under the VAT threshold, run it as a sole trader potentially, or whatever. You have to make that decision. But realistically, if you're looking to make a good go of this, I think probably going straight to limited company might be the best thing. Again, your decision. I'm just telling you what I did and then what I wish I'd done. So, but yeah, you'll be a slower learner if you just keep trying to take 2 bites of this VAT threshold. So guys, hopefully you found that interesting. I have a free Discord, guys. You can come in. It's 100% free to join. It's 100% free forever. You can come and join. You can ask me questions about anything to do with Amazon FBA. I answer 99.99% of questions. You've got other people in there as well who are starting their journey, who are existing sellers. You can hang out with them, ask them questions as well, just chat in general. And it's just a great place to, chat to other sellers, and it's a great community. So if you want to join that, there's a link in the description. And hopefully, guys, you enjoyed that video. And as always, like, comment, subscribe. Peace.